They're like, yeah, my last therapist would say stuff like, oh, yeah, you need to kind of go and get out there and force yourself to go and be in a social situation. And it's like, really? How? And why? And like, does anyone have an idea of what are you going to do? Just go to the fucking mall and then walk? Well, like literally, like if you're a 50-year-old super successful businessman, that's what you're going to fucking do? Is you're going to just go to the mall and walk through and be like, oh, yes, look at this. Like,
we now bring you Enter the Freud.
This is for entertainment purposes only. It is no way medical advice.
There's so much being said about the sensation of social isolation.
Right.
Social isolation as a phenomenon is trying to be quantified and measured and then compared to, oh, it causes more health problems than smoking cigarettes. Or
right.
It's the pain of social isolation is indistinguishable from physical pain. That's another study I looked at.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And what intrigues me is I feel like when people talk about social isolation, there's a tendency to just assume that it's because of COVID, and because of COVID, everyone retreated to their apartments and worked on Zoom for 2 years. And so now everyone's been isolated for the past couple of years, and it's slow to get back going. And obviously there's some truth to that, but I think there's a much more interesting story about why we humans are choosing to sit in our living rooms on our computers or in front of Netflix or swiping on our phone. Like, we're choosing that. And yeah, COVID really amped it up dramatically, but now people are choosing to not go back to work. A ton of people are choosing to sit in their pajamas in their living room all day, every day. And why are humans increasingly choosing that?
I don't know, but there's a phenomenon that's kind of got some publicity in Japan I think it's called hikikomori. It's probably pronounced hikikomori, or like, I don't fucking Nanyo sakuru yo. Like, I don't know how, but it's spelled hikikomori. And
And what does it mean?
it means like a form of full removal from the world. And often these people will just stay in their bedroom for months and years at a time. And there's 500,000 young people doing that in Japan and 500,000 middle-aged people doing it. There's 1 million people in Japan hiding in their rooms.
And they're kind of like doing some sort of work on a computer?
I have no idea what they're doing. But they are socially reclusive. Like, minimal contact with the outside world.
So that maybe suggests that this tendency that we're talking about is more advanced in Japan, and that it's like kind of like a cultural thing, and certain cultures tend towards self-isolation.
Yeah, there has to be. And if we do a cultural comparison, it gets really weird because Europe I saw some study where they were claiming that a bunch of these European countries were only like 6% lonely, but then after COVID, it's 26%, an increase of 20%. But and maybe that's accurate, right? Because some of those countries had really crazy lockdowns in ways that we didn't, like in Italy or dude, I can't remember which countries there were where you would get massive fines and the police were after you if you left your apartment. Remember that? So maybe there was a worse forced isolation experience. And then what if we go and look at countries like India, where in some parts of India you would say like, good luck finding any fucking isolation. Like, that would be impossible to achieve.
Yes.
Like, that's super.
Well, my theory is that humans, for most of human history, isolation was impossible to achieve because they were living in tribes, and there were no buildings with walls and doors you could close. And just to survive, the tribe had to work together. So I think for 99.9999% of human history and 99.99999% of humans ever, isolation was impossible.
Yeah. Well, it's
and now it's getting more and more. Now there's apparently 1 million people in Japan who've been isolated for years, and I think it's a bigger deal. I think that we need to think more critically about this.
Definitely. Well, certainly later on, when we try to figure out what the hell are we going to do about this, not only individually with our patients, but as a collective. If this trend continues, I mean, look, it gets really weird though because the terms just get muddled, and the ideas of like for example, I tried to find the American equivalent of hikikomori. And it's just like, the failure to launch people, right? Mm-hmm. That term, it kind of is an umbrella term for people who are staying at home past the developmental stage. So there's like 10 million Americans that are 24 to 34 that still live at home with their parents. And that, once again, if you look at India, how many people still live with their parents? Well, it's like 1 billion, right? Because that's the family structure. But in America, you are not supposed to live with your parents. You're supposed to achieve this kind of nuclear family individuality. You separate and you get your own house, you do your thing. Like that's, and if you don't do that, now it's considered like it's pathological. That's what we call it.
Well, and then I don't have the stats, but here's my guess is that the tons of people in America, these 20-somethings in America who are still living with their parents, a lot of them are like living in the basement playing video games all day, eating TV dinners kind of thing. Whereas the bazillion people in India living with their parents, they're helping out on the family farm and helping raise their young nieces and nephews, and their work, and it's like a healthy part of the societal structure. Where the failure to launch people, it's failure to launch. Yeah,
I guess just adding another layer of complexity, which I shouldn't do, but whatever. It seems like we had this weird trend. I just pile on layers of complexity, and then you systematically.
I'm trying to not drown in the layers of complexity.
you're constantly going like, let's simplify this. It's so funny, like over the episodes. But I'm gonna do it again because the difference between young people, like kids, like our kids' age, to then middle-aged to elder people in America and Europe. It's profoundly different in how much people feel connected or lonely. It's increasing that young people are feeling disconnected and lonely. Impressively. But then, like, what happens past the age 60? I was looking at this study in Europe, and it's like 50% of elderly Europeans feel totally isolated and lonely, and specifically women. And it was through countries like Ireland, Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands. It was so many countries that they looked at, and this seems to be like a global phenomenon.
That older people, especially women, are getting increasingly isolated.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in these developed countries that we're talking about, right?
Right. Not in India or not in Africa. That it probably doesn't happen so much because, again, it's like they still have more of the community extended family thing going on.
It's possible. Yeah. Well, so then.
Okay, so here, let me propose a.
You're gonna do your thing.
I'm always trying to like sort out and make sense and like arrange the room. So okay, let's put this over here and this over here, so I can see where the hell we are.
That's what I did a perfect setup for you.
Okay, so here's a theory I'll propose. I have no idea. This theory is just, I'm completely pulling this one out of my ass. But it's kind of an interesting theory, is that social interaction is a little bit like exercise or eating right. Kind of like the way I could propose this theory is like when industrialization of food first started, like we first started developing refined sugar and it became super cheap, then everyone just started just like drinking soda and eating desserts and everyone got really fat, kind of like we've seen happen.
Yeah.
And then later you realize, oh, wait, I need to learn some self-discipline and I have to force myself to do a thing that I wouldn't do, which is like restrict my eating. Or exercise is a better example. Maybe for all of human history, humans were just super physically active because we're like chasing down squirrels to try to eat them, so you're super active and you're eating a low-calorie diet because you just got to catch a squirrel to eat, But then at some point, when we're working in our offices and stuff, you have to force yourself to go do exercise because of some abstract intellectual principle of like, oh, humans need to exercise. So I'm going to go force myself to do a thing that I don't actually naturally, instinctively want to do. Okay, so the theory is that maybe social interaction is kind of like that. It seems weird, but I think it's worth considering is that humans have social anxiety or social interfacing with other people isn't that easy and it's kind of difficult. So increasingly as we can just like get into our nice comfy couch and sit in front of our screens and just kind of like have Amazon and Grubhub deliver everything to us, like that's what we want to do. But now we're going to have to realize that's not good for you. You actually have to force yourself to be social.
Dude, Esther Perel, one of your favorite ladies, came up with a term. Well, I don't know if she came up with this term, but she mentioned in response to the lockdowns, social atrophy. And I mentioned this just because of what you're talking about. That yes, if you live a what's that lifestyle called where you don't move a lot? You're a sedentary lifestyle. Well,
Yep.
then you experience all types of lean muscle mass atrophy, like significantly. And as you age past 40, it's a fucking cliff. It becomes a metabolic hormonal cliff that you can never return from. And well, you can never return from without tremendous effort and help. So like in this case of like developmental or stage related social requirements, it would be amazing to find out like how much does a person need? How many like casual acquaintance, hey, how's it going? You know how like when you're in those small towns and you every time you drive past someone in a truck, you wave, hey, what's up? Like how many of those do you need versus how many like you go to get some groceries and you say it happens to be a situation where you and the grocery people are familiar and you make a little jokes. Hey, oh, I see what you're doing with this combination. Oh, do you guys have any of this? Like how many of those interactions do you need versus how many those are like the most insignificant ones all the way to the point of just like how many I love you. Hey, great job to those that are the closest to you. Like,
how much like intimate sharing of intimacies or emotions. That's a super good question. We could divide it up to how many times do you need to like get angry and kind of like with another person, or how many times do you need to laugh with another person? And then we'd have to add physical touch in there too. How much physical touch do you need? How much like rough physical touch? How much tender? How much sexual stuff? Like all of that stuff. It's sort of like, I'm starting to imagine back to my analogy of nutrition. It's like all the different vitamins and minerals. We have USDA recommended daily allowances of vitamin C,
Yeah. Dude, but there is absolutely no recommendation as to how much social, emotional, physical contact one requires.
Yes.
Before, and you'd have to do a test. It's like, look, if you are below this amount, then you will start to have these symptoms.
Totally.
You could absolutely do a study. It would be a massive study, but this study could be done where you could find out, well, as we notice this giant population that is restricted and has like zero physical touch due to their special schizoid designed lifestyle.
Right.
Like that Japanese situation absolutely would be, if they were to get in front of a clinical psychologist, that is a schizoid personality disorder. But it's impossible because there can't be that many. You can't have 1 million schizoid personality disorders. So the criteria is just like, it's something else. This is
and if I try to push my theory, it's like there's an epidemic of obesity, and the metaphor then is there's an epidemic of these like self-isolating people and it creates this certain, I think, horrible psychological state.
Well, since we don't have a study that would help us, this is like a little call out to any, like, it's too bad we can't find any young young psychologists who haven't decided on a dissertation yet, but that would be an excellent topic. Like, get out there, start to propose such a study. But then again, if you know anything about research, like, no one's going to fund this research. There's no like, beef isn't going to pay for this. Milk isn't going to pay for this.
No, like, right.
Who the fuck's going to... The NIH isn't going to pay for it because you can't prove that it's going to solve a disease problem, right?
Right.
Like, no one's going to do this. That's probably why this shit hasn't happened. But that's me also talking out of my ass. But
no, but it's a good question. It's like, it doesn't seem like there's any corporation out there that stands to gain from realizing this hypothesis that we have.
Yeah. Well, what's going through your noggin before I grip us down another road?
Well, the way my noggin works is I'm always trying to go think about what we've talked about and then address anything that hasn't been addressed. And the very first thing is, why is Andrew Tate not angry but lonely? That's we haven't addressed that yet, and that's an interesting question, but we don't need to go back to that.
No, let's go back, because I think that this presentation, as it collects, well, public attention for its outrage, or for all of the young people who want to emulate this. I hear a lot of young guys talk about, much more Dan Bilzerian, that they want to be like him. Like, they want to be somehow buff and older, and then always on a yacht, flying in a jet with tons of models, and rich and famous. Like, that would be a fantastic way to live. This is what it looks like. But that message is exactly the opposite of what we're talking about. We're talking about a much more fundamental, how much social contact do you need within 24 hours versus a week versus a month? Because some shit you don't want to do every single day. Like, you don't really want to have an in-depth talk with your mom every single day. I think some people do, but whatever. Like, that some things, and I don't know, like, how much of the feelings of loneliness do you think would be staved away from a lifestyle that is, like, I want to say, pretended by Dan Bilzerian? I don't know anything about the guy other than, like, a few clips people have sent me saying, hey, look at this. Like, that, like, being surrounded by that many beautiful women, that if they were your friends and confidants and lovers, like, that may stave off like 90% of the experience of loneliness. Seriously. But you're going to miss out on the connection with your parents. You're gonna miss out on the rewarding experience of raising awesome kids who then continuously look to you as like, oh man, this is great. Like we're in this together. And also there's like a missing component with bros. Like you and your boys are not like tackling the world's adventures. But whatever.
This metaphor is popping to mind because I it's maybe relevant. It certainly is interesting. It's like the chimpanzees or the bonobos world versus the gorillas world. And there is this manosphere movement towards become an alpha male and like optimize your life and, earn a lot of money and work out a lot and get super buff and successful and become a Chad, that term, Chad. Like become a Chad and be the most you can be. The whole manosphere is kind of like pushing that whole worldview. And I do feel like they're living like in a gorilla assumption of a world as opposed to the chimpanzee thing. So my understanding of maybe bonobos even more so than chimpanzees, I'm not really sure, is that it's much more of a egalitarian social community that shares, and that their evolutionary adaptation is to work together and to share, and they share sexual partners and they share food and they're working together. Whereas the gorilla, and again, I don't really know much about chimpanzees and gorillas, but this is the stereotypical
You're a primatologist.
Right.
This is Dave's primatologist lecture.
Is that the gorilla is more in the model of like what the lions do, which is there's like one alpha, and he don't let any other guys be around, and he hoards all the ladies for himself until occasionally a new young alpha comes and fights him and knocks him out, and then he takes over the horde of ladies.
That's right.
And my belief, I sort of think humans, male humans or all humans, I think we kind of have both of those tendencies in us. But if you watch documentaries or read about indigenous tribes, it sounds way more to me like the bonobos and the chimps, really. It doesn't look like, there's no evidence to me that looks like humans did the gorilla thing where there's like one man having sex with all the women and then a bunch of young estranged dudes who are like pissed because they have no ladies. It doesn't seem like we did that.
No.
Not really.
No, I don't think we ever did. And as you see within chimps, they don't do that. There is absolutely no ruler by gorilla dominance. Anyone who tries to do that gets torn apart by like 7 or 8 other chimps. They gang up and they're just like, fuck this dude. And humans are way more sophisticated in that way. We totally will just like poison, stab, kill in the night. We need to dispose of anybody like that. But
totally.
That also has a lot to do with like male bonding, as you see young teenagers cruise around in groups of 5 to 8 going around in this thing. But then those groups, if we weren't so organized and civilized, I suppose we are drifting off into this like primatologist world that both of us don't know shit about. But as we gravitate back to human beings, that now it's a territory that we totally know a ton about. And it's like this, as it relates to, how does this relate to this kind of a phenomenon of needing a social or a contact, a connection amount, an FDA approved connection amount?
Well, simply put, if we're more like chimps than we are like gorillas, which I strongly believe, then we need a lot of community connection with all types of different genders and ages, and just to be in a complex community interconnected web, we need that because we evolved having that. And this model, the manosphere, red pill, Andrew Tate model, is aimed towards the gorilla thing, which I don't think actually ultimately works that well with our interpersonal needs or our mental health. And I don't think Andrew Tate's mental health is very good.
But yes, because if you're in a world where social connection is absolutely required for you to then climb the real rungs of social acceptance and achievement, really, if that's what it takes, and then you decide, oh, I'm going to just fuck this whole system, but that's kind of in response to what's been going on lately, where there's this like radical leftist movement that's just like burn down the establishment, defund the police, la 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 la, and also live like Andrew Tate, and then create an autonomous zone in Seattle, where then eventually people get murdered.
But the radical leftist, I think that they're more trying to do the chimpanzee thing. It's more like socialism. Let's all get along. And masculinity.
Bonobo.
Yes. And I think in the radical leftist, masculinity is toxic. So there shouldn't be any like hierarchical male sexual market value alpha thing. I think they're anti all that. So I think that the Andrew Tate thing is this extreme right counter reaction to that, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so my sense is that there's truths on both sides, but since both sides have gotten so extreme, they're both becoming imbalanced and kind of silly. And so it's a matter of finding the truths on both sides and trying to figure out how they can work together.
In that case, we should totally thank Tate for his work. He's doing a great job. As long as, but check this out. He has millions of young dudes subscribing to his program to learn how to live life. I should fucking subscribe to that just to find out what the fuck are they talking about. But I'm afraid it would be a terrible waste of money. Well, whatever.
It's no different than what he's always talking about. It's the same old thing, you know?
Yeah.
And I generally have this about everything, is that there's something in there. I think it's a mistake to just completely disregard them as all idiots.
Yes.
I think you picked the most idiotic thing, like the Hale-Bopp comet people that all killed themselves because they thought they were going to ascend. Okay, it's delusional, but I think what we have to do is like try to put ourselves in their shoes and try to find what it is, what they need, or what's feeding them in that. I think just dismissing them as idiots is a mistake. I think there's learning lost, and then that just creates this extremism.
Okay, I totally agree. Absolutely agree with what you're saying.
And generally speaking, the truth in the Andrew Tate thing is men, although we maybe would say women too, I don't know if it's only men, that men need to like be working hard towards personal advancement. And if you do that, like there's a need for that, to be working hard towards personal advancement and to be climbing a mountain. And as you climb a mountain, you gain nice things like a nice house and a nice car, and then you can get an attractive lady. And like we humans need that, and men need that. And the left is denying it and saying that's toxic and that's bullshit. And there's probably some mature men that are saying this in a more mature way, but for some reason, the more extreme expression of it that Andrew Tate is saying is what attracts kind of all the dramatic social media attention. Sure.
All right. Well, if that's true, and it definitely rings true to me that there is a need for all of us to do things as opposed to lock yourself in a room by the millions, and then I don't know what the fuck you're doing in there. Maybe you're the one who created Bitcoin, or you most likely are just stuck on Genshin Impact trying to get to level 55. Pointlessly. Like a waste of a life as you look back. But this is where I have to force us to go down to this next place of what are we going to do? This happens all the time where I run into patients of various ages that have this experience. They realize, oh shit, I am isolated. The contact I have is I have a girlfriend, and then I go to work and I have some contact with people at work. Then I go back home, and that's it. Like,
Yes.
that's my life. It clearly is not enough nutrients for the self. So then what we end up is a social atrophy.
Yes.
And that is painful, potentially as much as physical pain, chronic pain, which then leads to all kinds of, dysregulated hormones, and then early death and disease states.
Totally.
Like that.
Well, so the hypothetical answer I've proposed to this, and I know it's not as simple as my simple answer, but there's maybe quite a bit of truth to my answer, is it's this like short-term gain versus long-term gain, or not even gain, just short-term versus long-term. In the short term, it's easier just to go home and hang up by yourself and watch Netflix or swipe on TikTok. That's the short-term easiest thing. But in the long term, it leads to fucking misery and feeling like a loser and feeling awful. But in the short term, it's easier. Kind of like in the short term, it's easier to not go to the gym. And in the short term, it's easier to order a Domino's pizza. Yeah. But in the long term, if you just order Domino's pizzas, never go to the gym, and go home and sit in your apartment, in the long term, you're fucking miserable.
Yeah. But so then what are, like, because we don't have, first of all, we don't even have this mapped out. Like, as we mentioned, the criteria of physical, social, from casual waving in a car all the way to in-depth conversation about the meaning of life with your girlfriend. Like, we don't have this mapped out. It's like, how much does a person need? And then if we did know that, how are we going to facilitate that shit?
Yeah, that's a good question. Here's a thought that maybe is helpful in that. I don't know exactly how this relates, or even if it relates, but here it is I think I see, again, hypothesis, I'm shooting in the dark here. I think I see lots of youth who come home from school and go in their rooms and get on their phones and start playing video games or whatever. And it's easier for parents just to let them do that. And it looks very different than what youth were doing 50 years ago before computers were invented. 50 years ago, after school, youth were playing together.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I'm shocked actually when I see my son and his peer group, who are all like quite cool, healthy, pretty socially well-adjusted people.
Yeah,
they're not hanging out with each other.
Yeah.
Nearly as much as I did.
Yeah.
And I really think I probably did it less than when you see these like movies or something from like the 50s. It just was like kids were together like all nonstop 24/7 social interaction.
Yeah.
So a theory could be is that it's starting early. It's getting easier and easier for people to retreat into our phones and that we're learning to do it as we're young, and parents aren't forcing it. And now it starts to get easier just to let kids do school remotely.
Yeah.
You know? And again, it's just the path of least resistance. Is it's so easy just to get on your phone and do your thing on your phone. And I see parents who have kids the kids are struggling in school, they're getting into trouble in this way, that way, and the other. And then the parents are like, oh, well, I'll just let them do remote school, you know?
Yeah. Well, listen, that was a really good explanation as to how we got here. That was actually really good and helpful. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, like, what the hell are we going to do? Like, what, like this is, it. I hear these complaints about other treatment providers trying to solve this problem for patients who will say, like, I hear it because the patient is now my patient. They're like, yeah, my last therapist would say stuff like, oh, yeah, you need to kind of go and get out there and force yourself to go and be in a social situation. And it's like, really? How? And why? And like, does anyone have an idea of what are you going to do? Just go to the fucking mall and then walk? Well, like literally, like if you're a 50-year-old super successful businessman, that's what you're going to fucking do? Is you're going to just go to the mall and walk through and be like, oh yes, look at this. Like, why is that funny? What? Why?
Because the thought of the 50-year-old dude going to the mall is fucking absurd. Well, all right. So here's my.
Where's the alternative? What the fuck are we supposed to be doing?
Well, I think there are all alternatives. I think you and I maybe have different assumptions here. Let me share mine with you, and then I'll address yours. My assumption is, if you've decided that you need social contact, you've committed to doing it, and so you're gonna take the hard step of forcing yourself to do it. If you've done that, I think the job is 90% done. I think that if you want it, you can get it. It's not easy, but you can get it. I could be wrong, but if I'm trying to put my finger on the crux of the problem, I don't think it's how do you get it. I think the crux of the problem is having the person realize they fucking need it and they need to go force themselves to get it. That's my thought.
Yeah, you're right. We do have different ideas because I find myself frequently in the position of the person has already realized it, but then actualizing a plan appears to be profoundly difficult. Like even if you go on to meetup.com and you find out, oh, these are the things I'm interested in. I want to go on hikes too. And then you go on a hike and there's 20 people and you find that you can't relate to any of them. And so then the experience is a negative feedback.
Yeah. Okay. But so the problem then isn't that there's not a hike available, because I think there are hikes available, or book clubs, or running clubs, or you can go to in Minnesota, and probably everywhere, there's like cigar stores where if you're into cigars, you go in the store and there'll be like 7 dudes there smoking cigars and you can sit around and talking about cigars. Or there's in Minnesota, there's this Wayzata Yacht Club, and every day, 7 days a week, they go out on these cool little sailboats and have sailboat racing, and they always need extra crew members. And there's a bench, a literal bench that has a sign on it that says, if you want a crew, sit here. And you can go sit in the thing, and someone will be like, come on, I need you to crew on my boat. So I think there are opportunities. It'd be nice if there was more and better. And I think if people realized they need it, more and more opportunities would develop. But I do think there's enough opportunities. But you're right. If you go out hiking and there's 20 other people on the hike, and then you fail to make connections and have a positive experience, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and because it most likely would give you the idea that, oh, I made an attempt, it didn't work, see, the world is flawed, or I'm flawed, and I can't ever do it. I will never be able to, the problem is it lies within me. Or conversely, the problem is the world is full of dickheads and whatever.
Yes. Okay. So that's the biggest problem of all right there. That's bigger than mine problem and I think it's different than there's no hiking clubs problem. That is what I would call like the crux of most people's mental health problems.
What is it exactly? Say it again.
Getting your relational needs met is fucking complex as hell and difficult as hell, and every human being on the entire planet has problems in that area. Some people have serious fucking problems. Some people have relatively minor problems. And every person that walks into therapy, one of the main roots, and usually the main root, but always one of the main roots of their problems is this thing we're talking about, is knowing how to navigate interpersonal relationships to get your relational needs met.
Okay. Yeah, that was pretty clear. But my dream is to figure out like a kind of like a pathway that would allow from the very beginning of helping kids like your son and my son who are super socially well adjusted, like both of those kids are super dynamic, but they aren't doing this currently, and I don't know, maybe their hormones and whatever more adult things will drive them to do this, but I'm afraid at looking at the way that the world is starting to design it, or we are designing it, or it is unconsciously becoming, it is unconsciously evolving into a thing that would then perpetuate this I was going to say irresponsible, but like just a preposterous level of autonomy that then becomes, it's not autonomy anymore. It's self-reliance that then forces you away from a connectedness that we all need.
Totally. I totally agree. It made me think of this story. I was dating, back when I was young, I was like 22, I was dating this woman who was a nanny. I won't say the name of the people. They're pretty famous. A super, super rich family in Washington, D.C., kind of famous. You'd maybe heard their name. And she was the nanny for they had one son who I think at the time was like 13, and they had 3 full-time nannies. And this kid's 13 years old, and they had 3 full-time nannies because round the clock, they wanted to have a child care person available for him 24/7. You know, if like the kid needed to go to the ER at 3 a.m., they wanted a nanny there on call to like take him and like 24/7. And my girlfriend like was one of these 3 nannies, and they wouldn't he played tennis, golf, and like track or something. And the mom told my girlfriend, he's not allowed to play team sports because life is not a team sport.
Oh, wow.
And so it's just an interesting example of what you're saying here, that this uber successful family was training and molding their son to be successful in the worldview that they thought was successful. And yes, it's this hyper autonomous, hyper individualistic thing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm slightly saddened that we didn't come up with the ultimate model that would deliver age group 10 to 15 all the way to the final one where my Gramps is 95. And if you're married for 77 years to the same woman, and then she passes away, the God gives you 2 girlfriends. Like that. No, he figured this whole thing out. He's so socially connected and always has been, like profoundly. And, but once again, he's 95 years old. He comes from a different world.
Yes.
A different universe.
Yeah.
And
he grew up being extraordinarily socially connected all day, every day, from 0 to 40, because there was no such thing as phones or social media or computers. His world was a social interpersonal world.
Yeah, and him and my grandma did it so well. I've never seen anyone replicate it. It's like one of the greatest examples of how it could be done. But obviously, to do it today would need to be very, very different because of how we interact. So, yep. I don't know. I wish that's what I was doing, was figuring this whole thing out so that then it could be delivered to our kids and to our friends who then potentially struggle. And fucking dude, all of our patients, like that would be great. So whatever, this is a great intro conversation. Well,
yeah, and if you want to try to get a answer, here's what I'm thinking is the answer we've come up with. Step 1, which again I think is the most important thing, is the acknowledgement that humans fucking need tons of social interaction, and so we have to prioritize that, and we have to force ourselves to get it and to do it. So that's step 1, and I think that's a big part of the solution to the problem.
Okay,
you're adding a second, much more difficult barrier to the problem is like, okay, so what are all the subtle things that humans need to be able to do to be successful socially and getting their relational needs met? And that's a much bigger, more complicated thing. But I actually think that you and I, it would take us, we can maybe do this over the next couple of things. I think we could lay out a lot of the basic roadmaps to that.
Fuck it, let's do it.
All right.